Okay. Hello, Cubs. It is Wednesday, and I wanted to start off with a reminder of the question that I asked you yesterday, which I think was a little tricky for some of us. I asked you two things. I said, what do you think Norton Juster meant by you can swim all day in the sea of knowledge and still come out dry? That some people can swim all day in the sea of knowledge and still come out dry. And I do want to go ahead and thank Mason, Louisa, Dialing, Nishvita, Sarvaj, Trinity for at least responding, especially Dialing, Nishvita, Sarvaj, Trinity, that they thought about what they might say and then they wrote down, they gave me an idea. Just having the courage to say, hey, maybe this is what it means is a great thing, especially because no one knows all the answers and people can see things differently a lot of times in books. So thank you for at least responding to me. I really appreciated that. So I'm going to tell you right now what I think it means, okay? And the sea of knowledge is a way for us to think like the sea of knowledge that in this book is a literal sea of knowledge, means it's like an ocean, right? But usually when people say things like the sea of knowledge, they mean like learning. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about the sea of knowledge is like learning things. And so when Canby says some people can swim all day in the sea of knowledge, that means learning things, and come out completely dry. So I think what that means is you can spend like all day learning things. Some people can spend all day learning things, and then at the end they still haven't learned anything. Like they don't remember anything they didn't think about it. So they don't remember it all. So some people spend, think about it, you can think about it as a school day. Some people spend all day learning, and then at the end of that day, they still haven't learned anything. Because maybe they weren't paying attention, or they didn't think it's important. That's kind of what he's talking about. It goes back, if you notice, you should be able to see some stuff repeating by now. By now, you should see, ideas that are repeating within this work. Like, a lot of times we have had something where a character has said things like, well, if you want to learn, it's important to learn. We've had the, learning come up a lot in our book. Something else we've come up a lot of our books is this idea of, thinking before things happen. So the other thing I want us to keep in mind is what Milo said, which is, but from now on, I'm going to have a very good reason before I make up my mind about anything. You can lose too much time jumping to conclusions. And I think that's what, that's like Trinity says to think before. And I think that is the point. And I think that Nishvita said that too. The point of that quote is to say, think before you make up your mind about something. Or you do something, that way you're not wasting time. Think about it before, make sure it makes sense, right? And the other thing that we see, repeating in this book, I don't know if you saw it, is that the thing about rhyme and reason, all these characters say, if only rhyme and reason would come back to the land, then everything would be great, right? And we know that that's one of the reasons for that is because Milo is actually going to save rhyme and reason. But another reason you could think of is the fact that rhyme and reason, it means making sense, right? Logic, understanding. So it's kind of like saying if only things were logical, if only they made sense, then this wouldn't be happening. So we want to think about that and what Norton Juster might be telling us about those things. Now here we are, we were on conclusions. So I think that we're finally getting close to Digitopolis right here. So we're going to say the dodecahedron leads the way. All right, we're going to see how far we get along with this. Miss Canterbury has been timing it to see how long it is. So I'm going to try to make it through this chapter because we don't have a lot of time left to finish the book, and I definitely want to do that. But we've got a few pages left. All right, here we go. Up ahead, the road divided into three, and as if to reply to Milo's question, an enormous road sign, pointing in all three directions, clearly stated, Digitopolis, 5 miles, 1,600 rods, 8,800 yards, 26,400 feet, 316,800 inches, 633,600 half inches, and then some. Let's travel by miles, advised the humbug. It's shorter. Let's travel by half inches, suggested Milo. It's quicker. Pause. Is it any shorter or any quicker? No. They mean the same thing, right? But which road should we take? Asked Hawk. It must make a difference. They argued. As they argued, a most peculiar little figure stepped nimbly from behind the sign and approached them, talking all the while. Yes, indeed it does. Certainly, yes, it does make a difference, undoubtedly. He was constructed, for that's really the only way to describe him, of a large assortment of lines and angles connected together into one many-sided shape, somewhat like a cube that had all of its corners cut off, and then had its corners cut off again. Each of the edges was neatly labeled with a small letter, and each of the angles with a large one. He wore a handsome beret on top, and peering intently from one of his several surfaces was a very serious face. Perhaps if you look at the picture, you'll know what I mean. When he reached the car, the figure doffed his cap and recited in a loud, clear voice. My ankles are many, my sides are not few. I am the dodecahedron. Who are you? What's a dodecahedron? Inquired Milo, who was barely able to pronounce the strange word. See for yourself, he said, turning around slowly. A dodecahedron is a mathematical shape with 12 faces. And just as he said it, 11 other faces appeared, one on each surface, and each one wore a different expression. I usually use one at a time, he confided, as all but the smiling one disappeared again. It saves wear and tear. What are you called? Milo, said Milo. That's an odd name, he said, changing his smiling face for a frowning one. And you only have one face. Is that bad? Asked Milo, making sure it was still there. You'll soon wear it out using it for everything, replied the dodecahedron. Now, I have one for smiling, one for laughing, one for crying, one for frowning, one for thinking, one for pouting, and 6 more besides. Is everyone with one face called a Milo? Oh, no, Milo replied. Some are called Henry, or George, or Robert, or John, or lots of other things. How terribly confusing, he cried. Everything here is exactly what it is. The triangles are called triangles. The circles are called circles. And even the same numbers have the same name. Why, can you imagine what would happen if we named all the 2s Henry, or George, or Robert, or John, or lots of other things? You'd have to say Robert plus John equals 4. And if 4's name were Albert, then things would be hopeless. Well, I never thought of it that way, Milo admitted. Then I suggest you begin at once, admonished. Then I suggest you begin at once, admonished the dodecahedron from his admonishing face. For here in Digitopolis, everything is quite precise. Then perhaps you can help us decide which road to take, said Milo. By all means, he replied happily. There's nothing to it. If a small car carrying 3 people at 30 miles an hour for 10 minutes along a road 5 miles long at 11:35 in the morning starts at the same time as 3 people who have been traveling in a little automobile at 20 miles an hour for 15 minutes on another road exactly twice as long and 1/2 the distance of the other, while a dog, a bug, and a boy travel in an equal distance in the same time or the same distance in an equal time along a third road in mid-October, then which one arrives first and which is the best way to go? Huh? 17! Shouted the humbug, scribbling furiously on a piece of paper. Well, I'm not sure, Milo stammered after several minutes of frantic figuring. "You'll have to do better than that," scolded the dodecahedron, "or you'll never know how far you've gone, or whether or not you've gotten there." "I'm not very good at problems," Milo admitted. "What a shame," sighed the dodecahedron. "They're so very useful. Why, did you know that a beaver 2 feet long with a tail a foot and a half long can build a dam 12 feet high and 6 feet wide in 2 days? All you would need to build the Boulder Dam is a beaver 8 feet long with a 51-foot tail." "And where would you find a beaver that big?" grumbled the humbug as his pencil point snapped. "I'm sure I don't know," he replied, "but if you did, you'd certainly know what to do with him." "Well, that's absurd," objected Milo, whose head was spinning from all the numbers and questions. "That may be true," he acknowledged, "but it's completely accurate, and as long as the answer is right, who cares if the question is wrong? If you want sense, you'll have to make it yourself." "All 3 roads arrive at the same place at the same time," interrupted Talk, who had patiently been doing the first problem. "Correct," shouted the dodecahedron, "and I'll take you there myself. Now you can see how important problems are. If you hadn't done this one properly, you might have gone the wrong way." Pause. If all of the roads get to the same place at the same time, then would they go the wrong way? Something to think about. "I can't see where I made my mistake," said the humbug, frantically rechecking his fingers. "But if all the roads arrive at the same place at the same time, then aren't they all the right way?" asked Milo. "Certainly not," he shouted, glaring from his most upset face. "They're all the wrong way. Just because you have the choice doesn't mean that any of them has to be right." He walked to the sign and quickly spun it around 3 times. As he did, the 3 roads vanished, and a new one suddenly appeared, heading in the direction of the sign now pointed. "Is every road 5 miles from Digitopolis?" asked Milo's. "I'm afraid it has to be," said the dodecahedron replied, leaping onto the back of the car. "It's the only sign we've got." The new road was quite bumpy and full of stones, and each time they hit one, the dodecahedron bounced into the air and landed on one of his faces, with a sulk or a smile or a laugh or a frown, depending on which one it was. "We'll soon be there," he announced happily after one of his short flights. "Welcome to the land of numbers." "It doesn't look very inviting," the bug remarked, for as they climbed higher and higher, not a tree or a blade of grass could be seen. Only rocks remained. "Is this the place where numbers are made?" asked Milo as the car lurched again, and this time the dodecahedron sailed off down the mountainside, head over heels and grunt over grimace, until he landed sad side up at what looked like the entrance to a cave. "They're not made," he replied as if nothing had happened. "You have to dig for them. Don't you know anything at all about numbers?" Well, I don't think they're very important," snapped Milo, too embarrassed to admit the truth. "Not important!" roared the dodecahedron, turning red with fury. "How could you have T for 2 without the 2, or 3 blind mice without the 3? Would there be 4 corners of the earth if there wasn't a 4? And how would you sail the 7 seas without a 7? "Well, all I meant was," began Milo, but the dodecahedron, overcome with emotion and shouting furiously, carried on. "If you had high hopes, how would you know how high they were? And did you know that the narrow escapes come in all different widths? Would you travel the whole wide world without ever knowing how wide it was? And how could you do anything as long as... How could you... Sorry, guys. How could you do anything... The second grade teachers won't stop texting. And how could you do anything at long last," he concluded, waving his arms over his head, "without knowing how long the last was? Why, numbers are the most beautiful and valuable things in the world. Just follow me and I'll show you." He turned on his heel and stalked off into the cave. Come along," he shouted from the dark hole. "I can't wait for you all day." And in a moment they'd followed him into the mountain. It took several minutes for their eyes to become accustomed to the dim light, and during that time strange scratching and scraping, tapping, scuffling noises could be heard all around them. "Put these on," instructed the dodecahedron himself, handing each of them a helmet and a flashlight attached to the top. "Where are we going?" whispered Milo, for it seemed like the kind of place in which she whispered. "We're here," he replied with a sweeping gesture. "This is the numbers mine." Milo squinted into the darkness and saw for the first time that they had entered a vast cavern lit only by a soft, eerie glow from the great stalactites which hung ominously from the ceiling. Passages and corridors honeycombed the walls and wound their way from floor to ceiling, up and down the sides of the cave, and everywhere he looked Milo saw little men no bigger than himself, busy digging and chopping and shoveling and scraping and pulling and tugging carts full of stone from one place to another. "Right this way," instructed the dodecahedron, "and watch where you step." As he spoke, his voice echoed and re-echoed again, mixing its sound with the buzz of activity all around them. Tok trotted next to Milo, and the humbug, stepping daintily, followed behind. "Whose mine is it?" asked Milo, stepping around two of the loaded wagons. "By the four..." Oh no, it's not the dodecahedron. Here we go. "By the 400,827,659 hairs on my head, it's mine, of course," bellowed a voice from across the cavern, and striding toward them came a figure who only could have been the math magician. He was dressed in a long flowing robe covered entirely with complex mathematical equations and a tall pointed cap that made him look very wise. In his left hand he carried a long staff with a pencil point at one end and a large rubber eraser at the other. "It's a lovely mine," apologized the humbug, who had always been intimidated by loud noises. The biggest number mine in the kingdom," said the math magician proudly. "Are there any precious stones in it?" asked Milo excitedly. "Precious stones!" he roared. "Precious stones!" he roared even louder than before, and then he leaned over toward Milo and whispered softly, "By the 8,247,312 threads in my robe, I'll say there are. Look here." He reached into one of the carts and pulled out a small object which he polished vigorously on his robe, which he held up. When he held it up to the light, it sparkled brightly. "But that's a 5, objected Milo, for it certainly was. "Exactly," agreed the math magician. "As valuable a jewel as you'll find anywhere. Look at some of the others." He scooped up a great handful of stones and poured them into Milo's arms. They included all the numbers from 1 to 9, even an assortment of zeros. "We dig them and polish them right here." "Oh no, we dig them and polish them right here," volunteered the dodecahedron, pointing to a group of workers busily employed at the buffing wheels. "And then we send them all over the world. Marvelous, aren't they?" "They're exceptional," said Tok, who had a special fondness for numbers. "So that's where they come from," said Milo, looking in awe at the glittering collection of numbers. He returned them to the dodecahedron as carefully as possible, but as he did, one dropped to the floor with a smash and broke into two. The humbug winced, and Milo looked terribly concerned. "Oh, don't worry about that," said the math magician as he scooped at the pieces. "We use the broken one for fractions." There he is, right, the math magician. "Haven't you any diamonds or emeralds or rubies?" Oh no, sorry, that was not Milo. That was the humbug. "Haven't you any diamonds or emeralds or rubies?" asked the bug irritably, for he was quite disappointed with what he had seen so far. "Yes, indeed," said the math magician replied, leading them to the rear of the cave. "Right this way." There, piled in enormous mounds that reached almost to the ceiling, were not only diamonds and emeralds and rubies, but also sapphires, amethysts, topazes, moonstones, and garnets. It was the most amazing mass of wealth any of them had ever seen. "They're such a terrible nuisance," replied the math magician. "No one can think of what to do with them. We just keep digging them up and throwing them out. Now," he said, taking a silver whistle from his pocket and blowing it loudly, "let's have some lunch." And for the first time in his life, the astonished bug couldn't think of a thing to say. And we're going to stop right there. So, obviously, our math magician values numbers. And we talked already about who you agree with if you thought that numbers or words were better. But today I want us to reflect about all the characters that we've met. And I want you to think about the characters. Who do you think, if you were going to take over a job from one of these characters? King Azaz, if you were going to take over a job, would you take over a job of caring for all the words? Or would you take over a job from the mathematician, caring about and taking care of all the numbers in the kingdom? Would you take the job of Cromer the Great for putting all the color in the world? Or would you take the job of not Dr. Discord, but the sound keeper and be in charge of all the sounds of the world? Would you take the job of Talk to make sure everything runs accordingly? Right? So think about all these people that we have come into contact with and think which one is a job that you might like to do if you were taking over a job here. Or the weatherman, of course. Forgot about him. So which job would you like to take over? If you were going to take over somebody's job, which job would you take over? And that's where we're going to end. Thanks for reading with me, guys.